Now we have an opportunity to invite the Minister for Building and Construction, also Minister for Land Information, Minister of Veterans Affairs, the Associate Minister of Defence, the Associate Minister of Immigration, local MP for Kaipara Ke Maharangi, up in Auckland's northwest. Formerly a serving member of the Royal New Zealand Navy, Minister Penk also has a background in law, including co-founding a firm. So first entering Parliament in 2017, representing then the Helensville electorate. It was also my pleasure to be briefly introduced to him some time ago, again at that Loco house where, as Andrew just reminded me, I think you were quite impressed by it and also said, hey, maybe we should see a few more of those. So an opportunity now to hear from Minister Chris Penk.
Kia ora, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you here today. What an exciting initiative, what a great gathering. Andrew rightly referenced the energy in the room, but I also want to add my acknowledgement regarding the knowledge, the experience, the wisdom cumulatively within this room. You're approaching the same problem from a lot of different perspectives, and the program that's been put together today with a number of really excellent speakers providing their contribution, again from different perspectives, but all in service of that common goal. It's quite humbling to be in the room with such experience and wisdom. I'm grateful for the opportunity to start by addressing you, and no doubt you'll have a very fruitful day of discussion. Can I acknowledge the warmth of the welcome that we've had from Ngāti Whātua o Arake. Thank you for the special greeting that you have provided to this place. And I also, of course, want to take a moment to acknowledge the Green Building Council. Thank you for your advocacy, indeed your leadership within the sector. And I've had the privilege of meeting with you on a number of occasions directly, of course, but also at some of these other events in which people are rightly focused on different ways to, again, achieve those shared outcomes. From a government perspective, I'm here to share some of our thinking around the ways that we address key challenges, trends and opportunities facing the New Zealand housing market. For a start, of course, I expect we will all agree that housing in New Zealand is too expensive and has been for some time now, including across successive governments, I don't mind admitting. We have one of the least affordable housing markets in the OECD. The consequences of unaffordable housing are far-reaching. We see families living in motels. We see health problems from overcrowding and poor quality housing. We see reduced productivity. We see even apparently unconnected areas such as the school attendance issues that we face in this country related to insecure housing, which in turn relates to unaffordability of housing, which in turn relates to lack of supply of housing. Again, these are long-standing issues and they won't be solved overnight, but no government can be serious about solving social issues or environmental issues without also seeking to address the difficulties that we've faced in New Zealand over the years in relation to the housing market. So one of the key pillars of that is, of course, in relation to land supply, and that's work that's been led by my colleague and friend Chris Bishop, being not only Minister for Infrastructure but also Resource Management Reform. And naturally, there are many pieces to the puzzle that must all fit together. In my own role as Building and Construction Minister, as part of a housing group of ministers, is aimed very much at taking a holistic and systems approach to understanding those challenges, obviously unlocking the housing supply by way of the land, the infrastructure to support that, and of course the physical construction process itself, acknowledging in the context of sustainable housing not only the embodied carbon but also of course operational emissions that are recorded and measured and for which we've got to be accountable over time. So part of that drive for efficiency, which of course will have those benefits in terms of affordability and of course in related ways, which I'll get to shortly, sustainability, we do need to speed up the consenting process. We do need to drive down the cost of building products and part of that is removing the barriers to entry into our market from innovative products, including those with a particular sustainability story to tell, both here and overseas. And we've talked a little bit about enabling equal or higher standards from overseas jurisdictions as a method of measuring and therefore using those products in our own market. In terms of what we call the Going for Housing Growth agenda, there are a number of key aspects of that, and I'd like to talk about each of those in turn today. The first is freeing up land for development and removing unnecessary planning barriers. The second is improving infrastructure, funding and financing. And third, providing incentives for communities and councils to support growth. First then, freeing up land for development. This is about making more land available for housing. Sounds very simple, but of course this has eluded successive governments over the years, and so we're going to tackle that by requiring local government, various councils around the country to set housing growth targets and make 30 years worth of land immediately available for housing. The definition of that we're working through at the moment, and you'll hear more from Chris Bishop and others on that soon. Land availability is of course a key focus, because artificial restrictions and those which are not justifiable in terms of sensible land use and the coherent way that we want to plan our cities and our regions and our rural areas artificially constrain our ability to provide housing and therefore make it, of course, more expensive than it need be. Second, improving infrastructure, funding and financing. We're looking at ways to address this, again acknowledging that major constraint on growth. We're considering new funding and financing tools for local roads and water infrastructure, including improvements to the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act. We want to set consistent requirements so that growth-related infrastructure upgrades are funded by the people who benefit from that infrastructure, rather than being subsidised by councils or local government, or indeed central government, for which read, of course, ratepayers and taxpayers respectively, and how government's new transport funding settings can better support housing, including new funding tools for transport projects. And again, you'll hear us say a bit more about congestion charging and other mechanisms in due course. The third and final of these pillars is providing incentives for communities and councils to support growth. The key word, of course, there being incentives. For too long, local government has quite rightly and reasonably and rationally regarded additional housing as a challenge rather than an opportunity, with too little share in the benefits of growth, but then again a considerable share of additional funding and investment required by way of providing local roads and other services. It's been the case that councils have understandably resisted additional growth in a way that would be counter to the aims of any central government in terms of wanting to provide places in which Kiwis can live, work and play. So, for example, you've heard that we're considering providing a percentage of GST on new housing with councils to enable that growth and for them to be incentivised to share in the benefits of providing it. Lowering infrastructure costs, such as buying land for infrastructure corridors years before developments to avoid higher future costs. Radical stuff, albeit that it might simply sound like common sense to most of us. And in terms of making it cheaper and easier to build, referring to that building construction piece more particularly, I've referenced already our work around overseas products, again to emphasise that meets equivalent or higher standards to those currently in New Zealand. And we hope that there will be and expect and indeed require, in the way that we are designing that in the detail, that this will be a net positive in terms of sustainable building products and the practices that will lead from those. Likewise, in terms of streamlining decision making within the building consent system, as we look to rationalise that to provide more certainty and consistency across those some 67 different building consent authorities, it will be a key aim explicitly within that to enable innovation, including to provide greater degrees of sustainability in the way that we build, both in terms of the sustainability and the environmental friendliness of the construction process, but of course also, as others have already referred to today, to ensure that the carbon footprint over time is reduced accordingly. Building for Climate Change is a program of the New Zealand Government, and some very good ongoing work there has been led by MB, and I want to acknowledge my colleague Antonia Reid, who will be speaking next, in fact, and I don't wish to steal her thunder by speaking to the detail, of course, of what she's doing, but know that there are good people in government who are doing detailed work around this, including across different government agencies who like the ministers themselves, are determined not to work in silos on this, and of course working with the NGO sector, those in civil society, those other leaders, including in the corporate world, those who are funding, those who are financing, whether banks, of course those who understand risk and look to mitigate it from an insurance perspective, the builders and developers themselves, and so forth. So on that note, I recognise again that there is much that can and is being done by those who have an interest in the sector from lots of different angles. Clearly you're going to hear from many of them today, and no doubt this will be a good opportunity to connect with colleagues in the room to that end. So I wish you all the best for the remainder of a really excellent day together. Thank you for your work, and again thank you for the opportunity to be part of today's proceedings by joining you and sharing some of the government's thinking in this space. Thank you.